Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your passport to the stories that matter, globe showing Europe, Africa. I'm thrilled you're here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from around the world. Chapter 1, An Invitation to Mystery. Hercule Poirot was a man of habits. His day began, invariably, with a perfectly symmetrical breakfast, half a croissant, lightly warmed, 2 precisely cut segments of orange, and a tisane brewed for exactly 4 minutes. This particular Thursday morning in London, the world outside his flat on Whitehaven Mansions was grey and chilly, the type of damp English cold that Poirot, Belgian to his bones, never quite grew fond of. As he turned a page of Le Soir, content in the quiet rhythm of the morning, his manservant, George, entered the room with a silver tray. "A letter for you, sir," he said. "Special delivery. Dorset postmark." Poirot raised an eyebrow. Dorset? A county full of sheep, sea breezes, and secrets, n'est-ce pas? He took the envelope delicately, examined the seal, and noted the unmistakable crest, Denscombe. A family name that stirred vague recollections of society columns and minor aristocracy fallen on harder times. With a slender ivory-handled letter opener, he sliced the envelope and removed the contents. The paper was thick and scented faintly of lavender. The handwriting was elegant and deliberate, slanted slightly to the right. "Monsieur Poirot, I beg your pardon for the boldness of this invitation, but I find myself in need of your particular talents. I cannot say more in writing. There is a shadow upon Denscombe Manor. Please, if you value discretion and justice, come at once. You will be our guest for the weekend. There is no time to lose. Yours sincerely, Lady Venetia Denscombe." Poirot's eyes lingered over the words "a shadow upon Denscombe Manor." A curious turn of phrase. Not a crime, not yet. But a sense of impending doom, artfully cloaked. At that moment, Captain Arthur Hastings, back on leave from Argentina, entered the breakfast room, buttoning his jacket. "Good morning, Poirot. Anything exciting in the papers today?" Poirot held up the letter between 2 fingers. "More exciting than the news, mon ami. We are invited to a country estate, where something wicked this way comes." Hastings gave a low whistle. "Old country house, mysterious letter, worried aristocrat, sounds like the start of one of those thrillers you detest." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but life, mon cher Hastings, is not a thriller. It is a tapestry. Each thread must be examined, understood, and placed correctly. And this thread," he tapped the letter, "may lead us to something unexpected." By that afternoon, their travel arrangements had been made. A car from the manor would meet them at the station in Dorchester. Poirot packed light, though not without care, 2 identical suits, his silver moustache comb, and, of course, his patent leather shoes. The train journey was uneventful, but as they left the city behind, the countryside grew wild and storm-swept. Thorny hedgerows lined the narrow lanes, and the clouds above them gathered ominously as if mirroring the mood of their destination. They arrived at Denscombe Manor in the early twilight of the afternoon. The house loomed at the end of a long gravel drive, built of grey stone darkened by centuries of weather. Though the manor was clearly of fine Georgian construction, there was a sense that it had grown weary. Ivy strangled the south-facing walls, and a window in the east wing was boarded with temporary planks. Poirot stepped out of the car and paused, looking up at the house. "Bleak place," Hastings murmured. "Haunted, do you think?" "Not by ghosts," Poirot replied softly. "But perhaps by the deeds of the living." They were met at the grand front door by a severe-looking housekeeper, Mrs. Penfold, who spoke with clipped deference and led them through a cold stone hall to the drawing-room. The room was tastefully arranged in what must once have been a genteel style, now faded and slightly tired. Crystal decanters lined a sideboard, a fire struggled in the grate, and above the mantel hung a rather stern portrait of a late Denscombe ancestor. Lady Venetia entered with the quiet elegance of a woman who had once been formidable and refused to admit she no longer was. Her hair, a pale silver, was swept back in a chignon, and she wore a deep burgundy dress that matched the garnet brooch at her throat. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, offering a hand. "And Captain Hastings, yes? I thank you both for coming." "We are at your service, madam," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "Though I must confess your letter was most cryptic." She gestured for them to sit, then poured tea with hands that trembled only slightly. "You must forgive me. I could not risk putting anything more in writing." "Yet you believe a crime is imminent?" Poirot asked gently. Lady Venetia nodded. "Not imminent, Monsieur Poirot. I believe it has already begun." She opened a small box and handed him a folded slip of paper. The handwriting on it was different from hers, more jagged, hurried. He deserved what he got. Now another will pay. Poirot turned the note over. No signature. No watermark. The scent of cheap glue clung faintly to the paper's edge. "I found this slipped beneath my bedroom door 3 nights ago," Lady Venetia said. No one in the household admitted to seeing or hearing anything. "At first, I thought it a joke. But I have come to believe someone in this house is capable of much worse than cruel humor." "Have there been incidents?" Hastings asked. Lady Venetia hesitated. "Not yet. But there is tension. My children, Geoffrey and Beatrice, do not trust one another. There is bitterness between them. My late husband's business partner, Arnold Lacey, is visiting for the weekend. They have history. There are secrets in this house, Captain Hastings, and I fear they are becoming dangerous." Poirot sat back, folding his arms. His grey eyes flickered to the portrait above the fire. "You have done wisely, madam. The note tells us more than its author intended. They wish us to believe they act in justice. But justice and vengeance, they are not always twins." Lady Venetia met his gaze. "Will you stay, Monsieur Poirot?" He nodded once. "Until the matter is resolved, I shall remain. And I assure you, the truth, it always comes to light." Outside, a wind had begun to howl. Within the manor's ancient walls, shadows grew long. The weekend had begun. And with it, the game. Chapter 2, Denscombe's Secrets. Hercule Poirot had always believed that the true nature of a household revealed itself not in the grand dining room or manicured gardens, but in the small things, the flicker of an eye during conversation, a half-closed door, a conversation abruptly ended when someone entered the room. And at Denscombe Manor, such small things abounded. The next morning dawned with a thin veil of mist over the rolling hills of Dorset. From the window of his guest room, Poirot surveyed the grounds with mild curiosity. The lawn was vast but unkempt at the edges. The stables looked unused. Once proud statues stood stained with lichen. A house with history, yes, but also with stagnation. After dressing meticulously in his grey morning suit and polishing his moustache to mirror symmetry, Poirot descended to breakfast in the morning room, where he found a spread of modest fare, boiled eggs, toast, marmalade, and the usual pot of strong tea. Captain Hastings was already seated, cheerfully tucking into his second helping of toast. "Morning, Poirot. Bit gloomy outside, eh? But it's good to be out of London all the same. Sleep well?" Poirot stirred his tea. "Like a baby, mon ami. And you?" "Like a log. No ghostly threats in the night?" "Indeed," Poirot murmured. but let us not be lulled into complacency. There is an unease in this house. It clings to the walls like damp. As if summoned by their talk, Lady Venetia swept in, her expression tight, her manner as composed as the day before. "Good morning, gentlemen. I trust everything is to your liking." Poirot bowed slightly. "Exceedingly, Lady Venetia. Though I confess I am eager to meet your guests. They are gathering in the drawing room. If you would join us shortly, I'll make the introductions." 10 minutes later, Poirot and Hastings followed Lady Venetia into the drawing room, where the cast of characters who would soon occupy Poirot's investigative eye had assembled. "Allow me," Lady Venetia said, with the air of a reluctant hostess. "My son, Geoffrey." Geoffrey Denscombe stood by the fireplace. He was in his early 30s, tall and athletic, with a hard set to his jaw and eyes that gave away little. He inclined his head toward Poirot. "Mother tells me you're some kind of detective. Hope you find what you're looking for quickly. These family gatherings aren't exactly my idea of a weekend." "Charmed, I'm sure," Poirot replied coolly. "My daughter, Beatrice," Lady Venetia continued. Beatrice was as different from her brother as frost is from fire. Elegant and pale, she exuded a brittle calm. Her dark blue dress was cut in the modern style, and a string of pearls lay flat against her collarbone. She smiled faintly, though her eyes remained cool. "Delighted to meet you, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "I've read of your work. Fascinating. But I do hope your visit won't be necessary." Poirot merely raised an eyebrow. "And this," Lady Venetia said, gesturing to a portly, red-cheeked man nursing a brandy before noon, "is Mr. Arnold Lacey. He was my late husband's business partner." Lacey grunted. "Inspector? Or whatever the term is. No offense, but I hope you're here on a social call. Hate to think something's afoot." Poirot inclined his head politely. "The truth, Monsieur Lacey, is rarely what we hope, wise OUI. And finally," Venetia said, "Miss Catherine Elms. She's staying here temporarily while researching country estates for her doctoral thesis. From America." Catherine Elms, the youngest in the room by some margin, offered a bright smile. "It's a real honor to meet you, Mr. Poirot. I've never met a real detective before. This place is amazing, so full of stories." Her accent was distinctly American, her manner earnest. Poirot's sharp eyes lingered a moment too long on the notepad she carried. "A researcher, yes, but of what, precisely? And what is your focus, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked. "I'm studying the architectural evolution of English manor houses," she replied. "Denscombe is interesting because it has a Georgian foundation, but there are older parts beneath. Medieval, even. There's a blocked-up passage under the east wing I'd love to excavate someday." Poirot gave a small nod. "History has a way of pressing itself forward, does it not?" As the conversation turned to weather and weekend plans, Poirot allowed himself to fade into the background, observing. Geoffrey stood apart from the others, arms crossed, gaze fixed on nothing. Beatrice sipped her tea with too much grace, as if trying to be seen doing nothing wrong. Mr. Lacey was already on his second glass of brandy. And Miss Elms, she watched the others when they weren't looking, taking mental notes. Later that morning, Poirot and Hastings took a stroll around the grounds. A gravel path led them past the old stables and down toward a small, overgrown pond. Leaves floated lazily on the surface, and the air was thick with the scent of wet earth. "Well," said Hastings, "what do you make of the lot?" Poirot kept his hands behind his back, his eyes scanning the ground before him. Geoffrey, resentful. Beatrice, guarded. Lacey, blunt, and possibly too fond of drink. Miss Elms? Curious, yes, but that may be her nature. And Lady Venetia? Afraid. Deeply so. And guilt lies behind her eyes. You think she knows who wrote the note? Poirot stopped. I think she suspects. But suspicion without proof, Hastings, is like a map without compass. We must find the facts, the contradictions, the overlooked. They returned to the house in time for luncheon, which passed with strained conversation and forced politeness. Poirot asked few questions but listened attentively. When Lacey made an offhand comment about the Denscombe finances being a mess since old Oswald died, Geoffrey stiffened. Beatrice's fork paused mid-air. Father's arrangements were his business, Geoffrey said sharply. Indeed, Lacey muttered. Which was half the problem. Later, in private, Poirot said quietly to Hastings, this house is full of old resentments, like coals that still glow beneath the ash. The question, mon ami, is which one is ready to burn. As the afternoon light began to fade, Poirot stood once more by the library window, watching as the shadows stretched long across the lawn. Somewhere in this grand, faded house, truth was waiting. And Hercule Poirot intended to find it. Chapter 3, A Fatal Discovery. The bell for breakfast rang at 8:30, echoing through the long corridors of Denscombe Manor like a forgotten church chime. Poirot was already dressed, of course, his tie neatly aligned, his pockets square-folded with mathematical precision. Hastings, in contrast, emerged from his room slightly disheveled, still adjusting his cufflinks. Blasted cold in this place, he muttered. Not a soul about. You'd think someone would have stoked the fire by now. They made their way to the breakfast room, only to find it strangely empty. No Lady Venetia, no Miss Elms, no Geoffrey or Beatrice. Even the ever-efficient Mrs. Penfold was absent. Curious, Poirot said mildly, his eyes narrowing. Just then, a shriek tore through the silence. It came from the west corridor, a piercing, panicked sound that chilled the blood. Poirot and Hastings were moving at once, following the noise to its source, the library. Miss Catherine Elms stood by the open door, both hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Inside, sprawled across the Turkish rug, lay the lifeless body of Arnold Lacey. His head was turned awkwardly to one side, eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Most chilling of all was the ornate dagger protruding from his back, its hilt a gleaming brass shaped like an eagle's claw. Blood had soaked through the fabric of his coat, seeping into the carpet beneath him. Poirot stepped forward with deliberate calm. No one is to touch anything. I just came to fetch a book, Catherine stammered. The door was ajar. I thought he was asleep, slumped over. And then I saw oh God, the knife. Mrs. Penfold arrived moments later, her face pale. Behind her came Beatrice and Geoffrey, both still in their dressing gowns. Good heavens, Beatrice breathed, staring at the scene. Is he? Poirot nodded. Yes, mademoiselle. Mr. Lacey is dead. Lady Venetia arrived last. Her expression was unreadable. She did not gasp or cry out, she simply looked at the body, then at Poirot. So it has begun, she whispered. The library was sealed immediately. Poirot requested that no one leave the premises and that the police be informed, though he made it clear he would begin his own inquiries without delay. An hour later, Inspector Collingwood from Dorchester arrived, tall, brisk, and clearly aware of Poirot's reputation. I'd say you've already sized up the scene, Mr. Poirot. Poirot nodded. Permit me to share my observations, and then you may proceed with your own inquiries. Of course. Poirot turned to the gathered guests in the drawing room. The murder weapon, as you have seen, is a ceremonial dagger from the display cabinet in the library. It is part of a Georgian-era set gifted to Lord Denscombe in 1811. There are 4 daggers in total, 3 remain in the cabinet. So one's been stolen and used, said Hastings. Or rather, Poirot said softly, borrowed and returned. Everyone turned to look at him. I examined the cabinet myself yesterday. All 4 daggers were in place. Now, the one in Lacy's back matches the others in style, but it is not the missing blade. That dagger is still missing. The one used to kill him is of a slightly different pattern. Subtle, yes, but not identical. Beatrice frowned. Why would someone do that? To mislead us. To make us look for a missing weapon, when in fact the killer brought their own. And then planted a fake to create confusion. Geoffrey scoffed. Bit elaborate, isn't it? On the contrary, Poirot replied. It is the mark of a killer who plans in layers. He turned to Inspector Collingwood. Your doctor will confirm death occurred late last night. I would estimate between 10:30 and 11:30 p.m. The body was still slightly warm when Miss Elms discovered it at just after 8. Dr. March, who had been asked to examine the body until the coroner arrived, nodded. I'd say that's accurate. No signs of struggle. He was stabbed from behind, likely by someone he trusted, or someone who caught him unawares. Poirot turned his gaze back to the others. Now we must ask the questions, who had motive, and who had opportunity? He began with Geoffrey. You argued with Mr. Lacy yesterday, Poirot said bluntly. About finances, none. Geoffrey bristled. That's a stretch. We disagreed. I told him the family business should have been dissolved years ago. He disagreed. That's hardly motive for murder. Yet you stood to gain, Poirot said. Lacy controlled your late father's remaining shares. His death returns them to the family estate. To you and your sister. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. And I'm next on your list of suspects, I suppose. Tell me, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, were you ever engaged to Mr. Lacy? There was a flicker, so brief it might have been imagined, but Poirot caught it. That's old gossip, Beatrice said coolly. We were friends. Nothing more. But perhaps once more, until he broke it off. Poirot pressed. Beatrice said nothing. I'll take that as a yes, Hastings muttered. Poirot turned next to Miss Elms. You were the first to find the body. But you also mentioned yesterday that you were interested in the old passageways beneath the manor. Yes, that's right, Catherine said nervously. Why? Because there is a narrow, concealed corridor behind the library fireplace. It was used by servants in centuries past. It connects to the east wing, near your guest room. Catherine paled. I didn't know it was accessible. Indeed. But someone knew. Someone used it to enter and leave the library without being seen. By noon, the house was awash in whispers. Poirot had taken up temporary residence in the small study beside the parlour, laying out what few facts he had. The murder had been silent. There was no sign of forced entry. The fire in the grate had burnt low, undisturbed. What are you thinking, Poirot? Hastings asked. That our killer planned this with care. The victim trusted them, he did not rise, did not defend himself. The blade struck true and deep. And the note? Poirot retrieved the folded slip from his pocket, the one Lady Venetia had shown him. He deserved what he got. Now another will pay. A warning, Poirot said. Or a declaration. He looked at the name scratched faintly on the back of the paper, a smudge of graphite, barely visible. Hastings, he said, look at this. Someone pressed too hard when writing. There's another name here. A ghost of a name. It looks like Oswald. Lady Venetia's late husband. Poirot nodded. Perhaps this murder is not about Mr. Lacy at all. Perhaps it began with Lord Denscombe's death. The storm outside grew louder, the wind rattling the tall windows. Within the ancient stone walls of the manor, suspicion crept like ivy. A killer had struck. And Hercule Poirot had only just begun. Chapter 4, Threads of the Past. The air inside Denscombe Manor felt colder than the weather outside. With the body of Arnold Lacy now removed and the police having completed their preliminary inspection, fragile silence hung over the house. No one mourned aloud, and yet no one dared speak too freely. In Poirot's experience, this kind of quiet did not come from grief, but from fear. He began his inquiries that afternoon, using Lady Venetia's small sitting room as his makeshift office. The room was modest and feminine, pale blue walls, embroidered cushions, and a tea set on a silver tray that looked as though it had not been touched in weeks. George, Poirot said to his manservant, who had arrived from London that morning, kindly take note of any items that are out of place. Especially anything with dust disturbed. But do not touch. Very good, sir. Hastings, seated nearby, offered Poirot a glance. You convinced the key lies in the past? Poirot nodded. Always, mon ami. Murder is not spontaneous. It grows, like a weed, hidden until the bloom. His first interview was with Geoffrey Denscombe. Geoffrey entered with the same restless energy he had displayed since Poirot's arrival. His eyes flicked about the room, never settling. He sat down without being asked. I suppose I should thank you for not having me arrested yet, he said dryly. Poirot regarded him calmly. You are defensive, monsieur. A curious stance for an innocent man. I'm not defensive, Geoffrey snapped. I'm simply tired of being treated like I've something to hide. Then you will not mind my questions. Get on with it. Poirot steepled his fingers. You and Mr. Lacy had business disagreements. Several, Geoffrey admitted. The man was insufferable. Thought he could control everything father left behind, like we were children. And yet he remained a frequent guest. My mother insisted, Geoffrey said. She thought he was protecting us. But all he did was interfere. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Do you believe he was interfering with your inheritance? Geoffrey's jaw tightened. He meddled in the accounts. I think he was siphoning off funds. But of course, I couldn't prove it. And your father, was there bad blood between him and Lacy? A flicker passed through Geoffrey's expression, quickly masked. They fell out, just before father died. Over Beatrice, I think. Ah, said Poirot quietly. Thank you, monsieur. When Geoffrey had gone, Hastings raised a brow. He's not trying very hard to hide his dislike for the man. Precisely. And in doing so, he makes himself seem less likely to have acted, Poirot murmured. Yet dislike, when paired with desperation, becomes dangerous. Beatrice was next. She entered in a cloud of delicate perfume and sat with perfect poise, one gloved hand resting on her lap. I can imagine why I've been summoned, she said coolly. My name is bound to appear in everyone's theories by now. You were once close to Mr. Lacy, Poirot said. A long time ago, she replied. Before he revealed his true nature. Poirot tilted his head. which was ambitious, ruthless. He wanted influence over the estate and saw me as a path to it. You were engaged. A private understanding. He broke it off. Said it was not convenient. That's the word he used. Her voice caught slightly. I dare say he thought I lacked usefulness. And did you resent him? She laughed, cool and bitter. Wouldn't you? But did you wish him dead? No, she said. Though I wasn't sorry to see his bloodline end with him. Poirot's eyes narrowed subtly. Bloodline? She looked away. There were rumors that he had a child, years ago, with a woman he refused to acknowledge. Father tried to hush it up. Poirot filed that away. Thank you, mademoiselle. The next conversation was with Dr. Lionel March, who seemed far less composed. I was meant to have supper with Lacey that evening, he said. We had planned to talk over some estate business. But he never came down. Were you friends? Not exactly. But we understood each other. He was blunt. Unpleasant, at times, but efficient. Poirot folded his hands. And what do you think of the family? March hesitated. They're burdened. Geoffrey is angry, and Beatrice hides it better, but she's no less resentful. Venetia, she's a relic. She tries to keep control, but she's out of her depth. Did you ever treat Lord Denscombe before his death? Yes. I was called several times in his final weeks. He suffered a sudden deterioration, heart failure. No suspicions? Poirot asked gently. March looked puzzled. At the time? No. Why? Because someone wrote his name on the back of the note that warned of Lacey's death. March looked startled. Then perhaps someone believes Lord Denscombe didn't die naturally after all. Perhaps, said Poirot softly. His final conversation of the day was with Miss Catherine Elmes. She entered the sitting room nervously, clutching her notebook. You're the only person here who doesn't seem connected to the family, Poirot said. And yet you arrived only days before the murder. I'm just a researcher, Catherine said. My thesis is on the evolution of British estate structures. Denscombe has an unusual mix, Georgian with medieval substructures. That's why I came. You mentioned a hidden corridor. I found records of it in old floor plans. I haven't actually entered it. But it links to the library through the panel behind the fireplace. Poirot nodded. You were also the first to find the body. What led you to the library? I couldn't sleep. I came down early to look for a reference book. That's all. Poirot paused. And the name Lacey, does it mean anything to you? From before your visit here. She hesitated. He was my father. Poirot said nothing, waiting. I never met him. My mother told me only after he died. She worked at the Denscombe estate years ago. She was dismissed abruptly, when she became pregnant. It took me years to discover the truth. I only came here to understand who he was. Poirot nodded gravely. You have been honest with me, mademoiselle. I thank you. When she left, Hastings looked stunned. Good Lord. So the girl had motive after all. Ah, but motive is not guilt, Hastings, Poirot said. And honesty is not a shield. Sometimes the most transparent among us hide the greatest pain. That evening, Poirot stood alone in the library, the scent of old paper and firewood hanging in the air. He crouched by the fireplace and examined the panel. With a small push, it opened silently. Behind it, darkness. A narrow passage, old and long forgotten, wound into the heart of the house. He did not enter. Not yet. Instead, he whispered to himself, the past, it bleeds into the present. But whose blood is next? And somewhere in the manor, someone watched the detective with silent, narrowing eyes. Chapter 5, Shadows and Red Herrings. The storm arrived just after nightfall. A cold, lashing rain battered the windows of Denscombe Manor, rattling panes and soaking the grounds in gloom. Within the house, the atmosphere was no warmer. The fire in the drawing room hissed and crackled as Poirot stood before it, his back to the guests, his gaze fixed upon the leaping flames. No one had left the estate. By Poirot's instruction, the gates had been locked, and Inspector Collingwood had agreed to remain discreetly on the premises. There were no arrests, yet. But everyone felt the weight of being watched, measured, assessed. At dinner, conversation was minimal. Geoffrey barely touched his food. Beatrice drank more wine than usual, her tone brittle and sharp when spoken to. Miss Elms looked paler than ever, the shadows beneath her eyes almost violet. Dr. March fiddled nervously with his cutlery, and Lady Venetia simply stared into her soup, as though it might reveal some prophecy. After the meal, Poirot gathered them in the drawing room. "You must forgive my imposition," he said, "but I must speak plainly. Mr. Lacey's murder was not an impulsive act. It was deliberate, calculated. Someone in this house either feared him, or hated him." "Feared him?" Geoffrey scoffed. The man was a parasite, but hardly threatening. Poirot raised a hand. And yet someone feared what he knew. Or what he might reveal. He retrieved the note Lady Venetia had originally received, the cryptic warning left under her door before the murder. He deserved what he got. Now another will pay. Poirot held it up. "This, Miss Amis, is no idle threat. It implies knowledge of a first death, perhaps even one we took to be natural, and a second to come." Beatrice frowned. "You think the note refers to father?" Poirot nodded gravely. "It is possible. There is a faint impression of the name, Oswald, your father's Christian name, written on the back, as though someone pressed too hard when drafting it." "That's mad," said Geoffrey. "Father died of heart failure." "Or so we believed," Poirot murmured. "But what if someone helped him along? What if Lacey knew, and threatened to expose them?" There was silence. Thunder cracked in the distance. Poirot turned slowly. Mrs. Penfold. The housekeeper, who had been standing by the doorway with a tray of tea, startled. "Sir? You once worked for the Lacey family, did you not? Before they came to Denscombe?" "Yes, sir. I was young. In the nursery." "Do you recall any irregularities?" She hesitated. "There were rumors." Mr. Lacey's mother dismissed a maid suddenly. No reason given. "We all knew she was expecting." Catherine Elms stared down at her lap. Poirot nodded. A child out of wedlock, hidden away. Such things were not forgiven easily then. Especially when there was money involved. Beatrice spoke up, her voice sharp. "So now what? We're to believe Catherine murdered him for revenge?" "No," Poirot said gently. "Mademoiselle Elms came to learn, not to kill. She told me the truth, which is more than some have done." Another pause. Poirot continued. "But this is not the only falsehood in the house." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a pair of gloves, black leather, stiff with damp. These were found behind the coal scuttle in the library. Not Lady Venetia's size. Not from the servants' stores. He glanced meaningfully at Geoffrey. Geoffrey flushed. They are mine. So what? You denied entering the library last night. I did. I went in briefly. I heard a sound. Thought maybe someone had left a window open. But Lacey was already dead, and I panicked. I didn't want to explain why I was there. Poirot narrowed his eyes. And you didn't think it odd that a man lay dead before the fire? I didn't get close, Geoffrey snapped. It was dark. I thought he was sleeping. I left. That's the truth. Whether it was or not, Poirot didn't press. He turned instead to Lady Venetia. Madam, he said gently, why did you alter the note? Lady Venetia's face turned pale. What do you mean? Poirot held up the paper. This handwriting mimics Geoffrey's, but it is not his. The ink and stationery are yours. You wrote it to summon me. Everyone stared at her. I didn't know what else to do, she admitted. I thought Geoffrey might lash out. I feared the worst. So I forged the note. Hoping you would come in time. Poirot nodded. You did not predict an actual death. But someone used your deception to their advantage. Before anyone could respond, a sudden cry echoed from the hallway. Poirot and Hastings rushed toward it. They found Dr. March lying at the foot of the narrow back stairs near the servants' wing. A wooden beam had fallen from the overhead panel, narrowly missing his head. He was groaning, his arm twisted beneath him. Poirot knelt beside him. Careful, doctor. Do not move. I think it's broken, March gasped. I came this way, to check the boiler. Something's wrong with the heating. Poirot's gaze moved to the fallen beam. It wasn't rotten. It had been sawn halfway through, placed to collapse with the slightest touch. This was no accident. Back in the drawing room, as Dr. March was tended to by the constable and a nurse from the village, Poirot addressed the household once more. We have a second act of violence. Less successful than the first, but equally deliberate. The killer wishes to silence someone. Whether through fear, or force. But why Dr. March? Asked Hastings. He doesn't seem a threat. No, Poirot said slowly. But perhaps he saw something. Or perhaps he was mistaken for someone else. He turned to the guests. I must insist again, none of you leave this house. Until this matter is resolved, you are all under suspicion. The group dispersed in silence. Poirot lingered by the fire, staring into the flames. 2 deaths, Hastings. 1 real. 1 narrowly avoided. We must be close to the truth, or the killer would not be so desperate. Hastings nodded. Do you have a theory? Several, Poirot murmured. But theories must be tested, like tea, steeped, filtered, and tasted before swallowing. He glanced toward the window. Lightning illuminated the manor's reflection in the glass. A house full of secrets, flickering in the storm. And somewhere within it, a murderer grew anxious. Very anxious indeed. Chapter 6, A Second Strike. Rain had settled into a steady rhythm, tapping at the windows like fingers drumming on glass. The wind no longer howled, but it muttered around the edges of Denscombe Manor, like an old man telling secrets. Inside, the house was heavy with dread. Another act of violence, another question mark hanging over every face. Dr. Lionel March lay in the morning room, his arm in a hastily bandaged sling, propped up by cushions and a hot water bottle. A nurse from the village had arrived to tend to him and was now preparing to stay the night. Poirot stood nearby, hands neatly clasped behind his back, observing the doctor's recovery with silent intensity. "You're fortunate, monsieur," he said at last. "A few inches to the left, and the beam would have struck your skull." March gave a weak chuckle. "Fortunate, yes. But I'm beginning to feel a little hunted." Poirot gave no smile. "And so you should. This was no accident. The beam was sawn, prepared to fall when disturbed." "I only meant to check the heating," March muttered. "Lady Venetia mentioned the radiators were failing on that side of the house. I went alone, down the servants' stairs." "Who else knew your intention?" Poirot asked. March hesitated. "No one. Unless someone overheard me mentioning it at dinner." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then we must assume someone either followed you, or guessed you might go. You were not the target of opportunity, Doctor. You were selected." "Why me?" "Perhaps you saw something you didn't realize you saw." March stared at him, unsure whether to feel flattered or afraid. By mid-morning, Poirot resumed his investigation with renewed vigor. He asked George to walk the estate's perimeter, noting the location of sheds, gates, and unused paths. Meanwhile, Poirot summoned Miss Catherine Elmes for a second conversation, this time in the drawing room, where the smell of last night's fire still lingered faintly. "You know more about this house than most," he said, once they were seated. "Have you found any other hidden areas?" She blinked, surprised. "Other than the corridor behind the fireplace?" "Well, yes. There's a sealed stairwell behind the east gallery. I found a mention of it in the estate's oldest maps. A servant's passage from the kitchens to the upper floors, walled off in the 1890s. Walled off but not destroyed. Possibly not. The paneling is newer than the structure." Poirot tapped a finger on the armrest. "Could a person move through this passage unseen?" "If it's still intact, yes. Easily." "And where does it lead, exactly?" "To a dressing room beside Lady Venetia's suite." Poirot's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed. "That is most useful information, mademoiselle. I thank you." She stood to leave, but hesitated. "Do you really believe this is about Lord Denscombe's death?" Poirot nodded. "I believe it is about many things, most of which began long before we arrived." With George's help, Poirot confirmed the existence of the sealed passage. The paneling in the east gallery concealed what had once been a servant's stair. Now, the nails that held it in place had been pulled free on one side. The paneling could be pushed open from the inside. This house, Poirot murmured, was designed to keep the upper class hidden from the workers. And yet now, it allows the killer to move freely, like a ghost. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot summoned Geoffrey Denscombe. Geoffrey entered, shoulders tight, jaw set. "Another attempt," he said before Poirot could speak. "First Lacey. Now Dr. March. You realize the longer this goes on, the more likely someone else will die." Poirot nodded. "Indeed. That is why I must ask again, where were you last night between 10 and 11? Geoffrey's eyes flashed. "I was in the billiards room. Drinking. Alone." "No one saw you?" "No one." Poirot tilted his head. "You were found in your room shortly after. But you'd left muddy footprints on the back stairs." "I went out for air." "In the middle of a storm?" Geoffrey's silence was answer enough. "You are lying to protect someone," Poirot said quietly. "But lying is dangerous. It misleads the innocent and protects the guilty." Geoffrey rose, jaw clenched. "Be careful what you accuse me of." I accuse you of nothing, monsieur. But the truth, it will not remain buried. Poirot's next conversation was with Lady Venetia. She met him in the morning room, seated near Dr. March, who now dozed lightly. I understand, she said, that someone tried to harm the doctor. Yes, madam. And you believe it is connected to Arnold's death? I do. Her hands tightened around her teacup. I failed to keep my family together, Monsieur Poirot. That is my greatest regret. You are protecting someone, Poirot said gently. Perhaps you always have. She closed her eyes for a moment. Arnold Lacey was an unpleasant man. But he kept secrets. He held them like coins in a purse, spending them when it pleased him. Secrets about your late husband. She nodded. And about Beatrice. And Geoffrey. Poirot's gaze did not shift. What secret about Beatrice? Venetia hesitated. There were funds missing from the trust my husband left for the children. Arnold discovered it just before Oswald died. He confronted her, I think. She said it was a misunderstanding. But Oswald's health worsened quickly after that. Too quickly? Poirot asked. Lady Venetia didn't answer. By late afternoon, Poirot and Hastings reconvened in the study. Poirot now paced the room slowly, hands behind his back, deep in thought. What do you make of it all? Hastings asked. Poirot stopped. We have 3 acts, a murder, a deception, and an attempted second murder. You're certain the 2 are connected? MISOUI. The attempt on Dr. March, who is not at Denscombe, is meant to scare or silence. But silence what? That is what we must determine. He paused at the mantel and studied a small brass clock. Time, Hastings. That is our key. When people moved. Where they were. Who had access to the corridors. He turned abruptly. Tonight, we gather them all. Everyone. I shall ask questions they will not expect. And then, the threads will begin to unravel. You're close to the truth. Poirot nodded. Very close. And that is why the killer grows bold. The danger is no longer past, Hastings. It is immediate. He looked toward the window, where dusk was beginning to settle. Tonight, he said softly, we shall see the mask slip. And Hercule Poirot will be watching. Chapter 7, The Gathering Storm. The storm outside had passed, but inside Denscombe Manor, the tension was only beginning to crackle. At Poirot's request, the entire household was assembled in the drawing room that evening. The fireplace was lit, the windows closed tightly against the fading chill, and yet the air felt colder than ever. It wasn't the weather, it was the presence of knowledge, of suspicion. Something unseen yet looming. Poirot stood by the fire, his polished shoes gleaming in the low light. Behind him, Hastings leaned against the writing desk, arms folded, eyes scanning the room. Lady Venetia sat nearest the hearth, stiff-backed in a high-winged chair. Geoffrey stood, arms crossed, near the drinks cabinet, while Beatrice lounged with careful elegance on the chaise, a cigarette poised but unlit. Miss Elms clutched her notebook like a shield, her fingers twitching. Dr. March, pale and worn, remained seated in a wheeled chair provided by the nurse, his bandaged arm resting in a sling. George, ever composed, stood just inside the door. Poirot began with calm, clipped precision. I thank you all for coming. Tonight, I shall ask questions. Some will seem irrelevant. Others will seem intrusive. I ask only that you answer honestly. We've already told you everything we know, Geoffrey muttered. None, Poirot replied, "You have told me everything you are comfortable revealing." "That is not the same." A long pause. No one replied. Poirot turned to Lady Venetia. "Madam, when your husband died, were you alone with him?" "No," she said. "Beatrice was in the room. And Dr. March arrived shortly after he collapsed." Poirot nodded. "And the will was revised only weeks earlier?" "Yes." Oswald made new arrangements. Some were surprised, but he assured me it was all in order. He turned to Geoffrey. "Did you benefit from the revised will?" "Not especially," Geoffrey said with a shrug. "Father split things evenly between Beatrice and me." "But not between you and your mother?" "No. She already had the house. He made sure she was well cared for." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "the accounts were drained. The estate is nearly insolvent." A murmur went through the room. "You think someone took the money?" Beatrice asked sharply. "I know someone did," Poirot said. "The accounts show irregular transfers. Someone funneled funds into a private holding, under a false company name." Geoffrey straightened. "And you think that was me?" Poirot didn't answer. He let the question hang. "Then who?" Beatrice asked, frowning. Poirot walked slowly to the center of the room. "You ask the right question, mademoiselle. But you ask it too late. The answer is not only about the money. It is about motive. Who feared exposure most when Lacey came to the house?" He turned to Catherine Elms. "Mademoiselle, you came here to uncover your parentage, did you not?" Catherine shifted. "Yes. You learned that Arnold Lacey was your father. You also believed he might acknowledge you, even after death." "I hoped," she said quietly. "But that hope was in vain. He never mentioned you in his will. He never sought you out." "No," she whispered. "He didn't." Poirot's voice softened. "That must have hurt you, deeply." "I didn't kill him." "I know," he said, to everyone's surprise. "You came to find something. Not to destroy." Poirot turned back to the others. But others in this room had more reason to fear what Lacey knew. "Lady Venetia, you altered the original note to bring me here, yes. But you were not the one who killed Lacey." Venetia nodded slowly. "I feared something was coming. But I never expected death." Poirot now faced Dr. March. "You were nearly killed last night. But I believe that attack was not meant for you." March blinked. "Then, for whom?" Poirot's gaze moved slowly across the room before landing on Beatrice. "Madam," he said gently, "you occupy a suite near the eastern gallery. The blocked servants' passage connects directly to your dressing room." Beatrice's posture stiffened. "You told me you retired early the night of the murder. But someone was seen walking through the corridor just after 10:30, seen by Catherine Elms, who was coming downstairs for a book." Catherine nodded. "I thought it was a servant at first. Just a figure passing behind the fireplace." Poirot took a step forward. "And yet, there are no servants in the East Wing after 10. The housekeeper confirmed this." Beatrice's voice was calm, but tight. "So now I'm the killer?" "Non," Poirot said, "you are not. But you have been protecting someone." Beatrice's fingers clenched around her handkerchief. "That's absurd." Poirot looked at her carefully. "It is not a crime to be loyal, mademoiselle. Even to those who do not deserve it." Then, suddenly, Poirot turned to Geoffrey. "You were in the corridor that night. The muddy prints on the servant's stair were yours. The gloves hidden in the library, yours. You claimed you went out for air, but there was no windfall, no footprints near the door. Geoffrey flushed. You twisting this? Poirot's voice remained even. You were in the library. You saw Lacey's body. You said you thought he was asleep. But there was blood. A dagger in his back. You lied. Beatrice stood abruptly. Stop it. Everyone turned. Poirot's eyes met hers. Then say what you came here to say, mademoiselle. Beatrice's mouth trembled. Geoffrey didn't do it. He went to confront Lacey, yes. But he found him dead. He told me. He panicked. I told him to lie. I thought they'd blame him. Why would they? Poirot asked softly. Because of the money, she said, a sob in her throat. He found out I took it. Gasps filled the room. Beatrice continued, eyes wet. It started with small withdrawals. Then father found out. Lacey too. Lacey threatened to tell everyone, to ruin us. Geoffrey begged him to stay silent. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And so Geoffrey killed him. No, she cried. Someone else did. But I don't know who. Poirot looked at each face in the room, one by one. Now we see, he said quietly. Everyone here has a secret. Every alibi has holes. Every truth is shaped like a lie. Hastings leaned forward. So what now? Now, Poirot said, stepping away from the fire, we wait until tomorrow. The answers are nearly here. He turned one last time, voice calm and certain. And tomorrow, Miss Amis, I will reveal everything. Chapter 8, Poirot Speaks. The next morning broke with quiet dignity. Gone was the storm, in its place came a pale sun, filtered through lace curtains and early autumn mist. The calm after chaos, Hercule Poirot thought, was often the most dangerous time of all, for now, guilt weighed heavily upon the guilty. At precisely 10 o'clock, the household was summoned once again to the drawing room. The fire had been lit anew, but its warmth could not soften the tension in the room. Everyone sat in rigid silence, awaiting Poirot's verdict. Geoffrey paced restlessly by the window. Beatrice stood with arms crossed near the fireplace. Lady Venetia sat, regal but visibly worn. Catherine Elms, withdrawn and pale, held her notebook like a talisman. Dr. March, arm still in a sling, remained quietly attentive. Inspector Collingwood and Hastings stood to the side, as silent observers. Poirot entered last, calm and composed as ever. He took his place by the hearth, brushing a speck of lint from his sleeve with unnecessary precision. Miss Amis, he began, the events of the past 2 days have brought much suffering, and much confusion. A man is dead, another was nearly so, and the shadow of an earlier death, Lord Denscombe's, has returned to haunt us. He allowed the words to settle before continuing. The murderer believed themselves clever. And indeed, they are. They built a plan with layers, false clues, concealed truths, and the manipulation of others. But, as always, logic prevails. There are 3 pillars upon which this solution rests: opportunity, motive, and fear. He turned to Lady Venetia. You received a note, ominous, unsigned. You forged another to bring me here, fearing your son might act rashly. Yet the original was real, yes? A genuine warning? Lady Venetia nodded slowly. I didn't know who wrote it. But yes, it was real. Poirot held up the folded paper. This note contains faint impressions of another name. As I said, Oswald. Someone intended us to consider Lord Denscombe's death. Why? Because this was not their first crime. This was merely the latest in a sequence. He paused, turning to Dr. March. You examined Lord Denscombe, did you not? Yes. I certified his death. Poirot tilted his head. And you found nothing suspicious? At the time? No. Poirot raised a finger. And yet, my investigation uncovered an old bottle of digitalis, an outdated cardiac medication, hidden in the medicine cabinet. A medication no longer prescribed, but once used to treat heart conditions. Dr. March frowned. I didn't prescribe that. Precisely, said Poirot. Which means someone else gave it to Lord Denscombe. Inappropriately. And in fatal quantity. A collective breath was drawn. Poirot turned to the room. We now come to Arnold Lacey. He was a cruel man, yes, but he was also shrewd. He suspected that Lord Denscombe had not died naturally. He confronted the person he believed responsible, and threatened to reveal the truth. Which led to his death, Hastings murmured. Just so, said Poirot. He was murdered. Not in a fit of rage, but coldly. Silently. The killer used a dagger not from the cabinet, but an imitation, then returned it later, knowing the confusion it would sow. Geoffrey frowned. But you said the killer came through the servant passage. No, said Poirot. That was a misdirection. The killer wanted us to believe they entered unseen. But they never left. Because they were already in the room. Poirot turned slowly to Dr. March. You were there. Waiting. Gasps erupted around the room. March blinked. What? This is absurd. Is it? Poirot's voice was cool and sharp. Let us look at the facts. You had access to the library. You were one of the last people Lacey trusted. You knew about Lord Denscombe's condition, and more importantly, you were the one who discovered both men. You conveniently arrived after Oswald collapsed, and again when Lacey was supposedly still alive, though you never actually saw him that night. But why? Catherine whispered. Why would he kill them? Motive, said Poirot. You see, Dr. March was not simply the family physician. He was also deeply invested in a private company that was losing money, badly. He had advised Lord Denscombe to invest quietly. When the company failed, March stood to lose everything, unless the truth was buried. Poirot turned to Lady Venetia. Did your husband mention a March Therapeutics? Her eyes widened. Yes. He told me it was a modest investment. He never discussed it after that. Because it failed, Poirot said. And March feared exposure. When Oswald began asking questions, about the company, about his own health, March silenced him. And Lacey? Geoffrey asked, shaken. Lacey uncovered the failed investment, and guessed the truth about Oswald's death. March could not afford to be revealed. So he arranged to meet Lacey in the library. The weapon was already hidden there. He stabbed him quickly, just below the shoulder blade, angled up, where the heart would be reached without immediate bleeding. Poirot's voice lowered. And when Dr. March went to the servants' stairs last night, he wasn't going to check the boiler. He was going to retrieve or destroy evidence. But someone, perhaps the killer themselves, anticipated this. And tried to kill him in turn. Dr. March stood, his face pale. You have no proof. But I do, Poirot said quietly. Miss Elms discovered an account ledger yesterday, buried among the estate records. It showed falsified prescriptions in your handwriting. Digitalis, ordered under Lord Denscombe's name. You forged them. Miss Elms produced a notebook, her hand trembling. Poirot stepped forward. The motive, to protect your secret. The opportunity, twice, unchallenged. And the fear, of discovery. That is what drives a man like you. Not rage. Not vengeance. Just fear. There was silence. Dr. March sank back into his chair. I never meant for it to happen like this, he murmured. But it did. One mistake. Then another. And then I had no choice. Inspector Collingwood stepped forward and placed a hand on the doctor's shoulder. You'll have to come with me. Later, as the others dispersed, some weeping, some silent, Poirot and Hastings remained alone in the drawing room. Another case, solved, Hastings said quietly. Poirot nodded. But no victory. Only truth. Hastings poured 2 brandies. It's always the quiet ones, eh? Poirot gave a small, sad smile. Not always, mon ami. But often, it is those who believe they are cleverer than others. Those who lie to themselves first. He looked around the room once more, its fine wood panels, its faded paintings, its heavy silence. Denscombe Manor, Poirot murmured, may never be free of its shadows. But it is no longer hiding a killer. He raised his glass, and Hastings mirrored him. To justice. To the little grey cells, Hastings replied. And with that, the great detective turned from the fire and stepped into the light of a new morning.